Welcome to It Takes a Village, Raising Resilient Kids in Today's World. I'm Dr. Ann Bergen. We know that every generation of young people has its own challenges that sort of reflect the time in which they live. And there are a lot of hurdles along the way that young people have to overcome. Life is hard. It always has been hard. But recently what we're seeing is really way too many young people who are in pain. We're looking at the levels of anxiety, depression, ADHD, suicidal ideation, which is all leading to more self-medication, which we're seeing now in the epidemic, which is the substance use disorder. And we're seeing these issues surfacing at younger ages and continuing on into college and beyond, greatly impacting the lives of our young people. So the purpose of this series of programs is how we come together as a community to support families. And we really rely on the wisdom, the experience, the resources, the insights that our guests provide to help, again, just in a supporting role to guide families on this journey as they hope to guide their children to lives of fulfillment and happiness. So I have had the great pleasure of recently talking with my guest today, MarkAltman, and who's just really is devoting his life into the cause of helping to ease the pain that young people are experiencing and giving support to families and giving kids the skills that they need to be successful. So welcome today.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate it. It was really, I had the pleasure of meeting your daughter and interviewing her. She's just absolutely lovely. And you can tell that you've been whatever you've done, you've done a good job in raising such a kind, caring young woman. So a wonderful reflection on you. But I digress.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So let's go and talk about you. So would you mind? And as I mention all the time, it's really in sharing our stories that we make the most impact. Because a lot of people, when they know that someone else has shared their experience or gone through some of the same things, it's a lot easier to connect and relate. So would you mind? First of all, telling us how you came to have this passion for what you do, and in telling your story. Could you do that?
Sure.
And then you can...
Yeah, I mean, I had I don't know if it's a unique situation or not, but I had a situation where I became a father at 23 years old, and it was certainly I was not prepared, and I was thrown in a situation where I had to grow up and learn a lot of responsibility very quickly. Mm-hmm. And I came from a good family, so I knew what I needed to do, at least in the sense of being responsible and being supportive and making sure my kids were taken care of. And so in any event, I had two kids very young, and the woman who, the mother of my two children, we were both unprepared, and we didn't even know each other very well. Mm-hmm. So we divorced when the kids were 1 and 2 years old, respectively. And so how to figure things out as a parent. There's no roadmap to becoming a parent. No one says to you, well, this is how to do this and this is how to do that. And so you have to figure a lot of things out. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that. When I was young, I didn't like growing up and not really knowing how to figure things out. And so I had the challenge of going through divorce. I had the challenge of raising two kids, one on the spectrum for autism and one who has pretty significant ADHD. And so I had to navigate some very difficult waters. And I was fortunate enough, because my personality is to really want to achieve and be good at everything I do, that I really talked to a lot of people to try to figure out how to be the best possible parent I could be and navigate those experiences. So the bottom line is that was a motivator for me to help other parents navigate those waters and help other kids navigate the waters. And my final thought on your question is, I think probably the area I'm most passionate about now is face-to-face communication. And I find that texting and phones and social media really dominate as the primary methods of communication now. and it's caused so many problems for both parents and kids, whether it's anxiety, whether it's stress, whether it's the lack of empathy. It's caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, I want to speak more about that because that's one of the issues in a number of programs we focused on. Certainly technology has brought us wonderful things, but there's a downside. And particularly is you can see, will you speak more specifically to when you talk about communication skills of young people, how that does undermine their, number one, their confidence and their ability to be successful out there? Because just speak a little bit about that.
Sure,
because it's,
sure.
It can be damaging.
So one of my favorite things I like to teach kids and adults, for that matter, is nonverbal communication. And so when you and I are having a conversation right now, and I say something and you smile at me or you nod your head in approval, well, I know I feel good. I know what's happening. Well, when you're texting someone, we know how distorted a message can get through text and email. We see that as adults all the time.
Oh, I always misinterpret. I always put a negative spin on it.
Well, and you know what's funny? One of the things I teach kids is if you're putting an emoji, if you send a message, and you're putting an emoji after it, one of the primary reasons you're doing that is because you're not sure how they're going to interpret that message. And people put that emoji or the LOL or the whatever because that's like, oh, they'll get it. I'm putting a smiley face in. And so when you're texting and you're emailing, kids don't know how to receive that information. They don't know. They don't see the person's face. They don't hear the person's tone. They don't see the person's body language. And that can be so traumatic and stressful for dealing with the emotions and stress of being a middle schooler or a high schooler. So it's a big problem.
Yeah. It's also the damage that's done keeping up with. I mean, there's a whole social thing when with Facebook and kids see that all their friends are hanging out and they're not there, and with that group, and say, why wasn't I invited to that? Because everybody's social life is put right out there, and it's all those social things that go along with it too, isn't it? It's with technology and.
It is, and I'll tell you a very brief story. There was a situation where I remember when I was in high school, my friends and I remember there was a girl. We didn't bully her, but we would tease her. And I remember this. And I stumbled upon her on Facebook. Now I'm 45. So I stumbled upon her on Facebook about 3 years ago. And I sent her a message on Facebook, and I said, I want you to know how terrible I feel for anything I might have done to you at that age, etc. And she sent me a really nice message back, well, we were kids, blah, blah, blah. But back then, and you know as well as I do, it was easy then. Like bullying and those kinds of things through text, and people can hide behind social media. It's way worse now than anything we dealt with back then. So that's the other part. It's like the communication where you can hide behind a device and try to hurt people and torture people. I mean, that breaks my heart.
Yeah. And the other aspect of communication is what we're seeing is that young people, a lot of them don't know how to make eye contact. They don't know how to have a conversation anymore. And certainly whether people like it or not, it's still, when you go to apply for a job, or it's communication skills are right up there as one of the most important that employers look for.
Yeah, well, so, one of the things I did last year is, my company Mindset Go, we developed this parenting skills workshop it's called Parenting Your Teen. And it's a free workshop. I just go around teaching it to give back. And one of the things I talk about in the workshop is how significant a role empathy plays in relationships and communication. And I find parents will put this pressure on themselves to not share their feelings or their emotions or what they're going through with their kids. And one of the things I teach parents in this workshop is you have to do that, because if you're not modeling empathy to your kids, if you're not teaching them how to be empathic listeners for you and empathic communicators for you, how are they going to do it with other kids and build those relationships as they get older? And I think that it's really important for parents to, if you're watching this at home, it's really important for parents to know that I don't care if your kids are in 4th grade or 10th grade, Empower your kids with a voice. Let them contribute. Let them feel like they can add to a situation where if you have a bad day at work, if you're a mom or a dad and you have a bad day at work or at home, tell your kids you had a bad day at work. Share with them why. Let them learn. They're human too. You're human. You don't have to be this pie-in-the-sky perfect person. And I think there's a lot of parents who carry around so much guilt, whether they're a divorced parent, whether they feel like they work too much, whatever it is. It's a big burden. And I think if you start sharing with boundaries, but if you start sharing as a parent some of the challenges you face and let kids see that, then they'll relate to it and then they can connect with that. And then when they know they're in school, they'll be like, oh yeah, my mom and dad deal with problems like that.
And and there's also that, and the way you were framing it too, is this expectation that I think we as parents, maybe because of the guilt or all those other things, we tend to do so much for our kids and we want to make everything right for them, and that we don't expect enough for ourselves. So by sharing our own stories as a parent is the expectation, it matters that you listen to what I'm saying, and that we kind of not command that respect, but we're so busy trying to ease their feelings all the time, but we're not teaching them to respect us and in turn develop that empathy and compassion for other people. Because I was just reading the statistics. They were saying that college kids now are like so less empathic than a generation ago, that they're losing that empathy. And as a result, this self-absorption is leading a lot to more anxiety and stress, because that more you focus on yourself, unhappier you are.
And I think it's a great point. And there's so many organizations out there now that are helping parents deal with opioid crisis or drug addiction of any kind and whatever. And I see these organizations and they have these videos that they show and the parents will come together. And one of my biggest things that if I could shake my magic wand and solve a problem, it would be the kids that I'd say are stuck in between. There's so many kids out there that don't have a severe problem.
You're right. You're right.
But what about the kid in 7th or 8th grade who's walking around with a lot of anger and hurt, and he or she doesn't really feel safe expressing it? Parents don't have the tools or template to really deal with it. Those kids, not in all cases, but in many cases, those are the kids that turn to opioids or turn to drugs or turn to alcohol. But if we catch it early,
right,
and if we actually know how to just talk to your kids, I think so much of that could be cut off before it gets to that point. So where I applaud and I have so much admiration and respect for those organizations that are trying to help and coach and support parents, I want there to be, and I'm trying to spearhead, frankly, a movement that says, just let's learn how to talk and speak to our kids.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? So if I'm a parent, let's say I come to you and I say, my child is showing signs of depression, not doing homework. I'm always having to force my child to do things. I can tell there's something wrong. I'm lost. I don't know what to do. So I'm a parent coming to you based on your experience and everything you've gone through and the research you've done. What advice would you give to me?
Well, I think I'll give you 3 pieces of advice. I think it's really important that as a parent you identify the optimal environment for communication with your kids. That is the place, the time, the duration, and the privacy aspect of it. Because as adults, one of the things I say to adults I coach all the time is, well, when you get home from work, do you like being bombarded and talking to people right away?
Right.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is, it's a 2-parter, and one is, you have to be having eye contact with your kids when you talk to them. If you're relying on a car ride in a pickup to talk to your kids while you're driving, you're not looking at the MI. You can't see the looks on their face, the reactions, so on and so forth. So make the eye contact when you're having conversations. And be on their level. Don't be behind a desk. Don't be behind a table. Be sitting on the couch next to them, eye to eye, so you're on their level. It's not like it's an adult parent-kid hierarchy of a different level. Third, I think it's really important that sharing becomes a bit of a burden for kids because they feel like, oh, mom or dad's coming, I have to talk. And I'm guilty of this, Ann. One of the things I think parents fall into a bad habit is they end up talking to their kids about homework or chores. That's the communication they're having with their kids. So kids start to see that, and they're like, oh, they're going to ask me about my homework or chores. So here's what I'm saying. You initiate the conversation, parents. Instead of walking up to your kids and saying, how was your day, which is what they're expecting you to do, go up to your parents and say, or go up to your kids, and say, you're not going to believe what happened to me today. You share your world. You share your life. And then...
That's it.
Yep. You share, and then if they don't feel, then it'll just organically create a conversation. So those would be some tips.
It's really that whole idea of just sharing that experience. And then the other thing, too, I think is powerful is sharing stories from our own youth. It's like, oh, I remember when this kid made so much fun of me in school. It was so embarrassing. And then how you dealt with it or how you felt. But sharing our own, what's it called, sort of coming out from behind the curtain and just, because I think, don't you think a lot of kids today think they're alone with whatever they're feeling, no one else is feeling it, that there's something wrong with them, and that all of us go through those things. We as adults went through them as kids, and we found ways to work through them, and sometimes we failed, sometimes we fell apart, but I don't know, it's really what we model as parents, isn't it? I mean, that's a big part of it.
Well, it is. And if you were to give yourself a self-test as a parent, this is how I look at it, okay? You could sit there and give yourself a hard time because you don't have as much quality time with your kids. You could give yourself a hard time because you're divorced and have a difficult situation. But ask yourself one question. Would my child tell me anything? And if you're not sure what your child would share with you, or if your child would share with you, that is when you say to yourself, well, if they wouldn't share that, why wouldn't they share that? Because the second those doors of communication start to close on top, and come on, the typical thing when we were kids is sex.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I don't want my mother or father talking about sex. So that's been kind of one of these generic ones all the way through. But honestly, I think that's the $1 million question. Isn't it the best compliment you could get as a parent if your child would share anything with you? So I feel like that's what parents should be asking themselves, and not beating themselves up if they're concerned their kids wouldn't share. That's not what I propose. I'm saying if you have concerns or doubts that your children would share, start asking why and seek help, seek support. So you learn how to create that environment.
But that's the other thing too, is that we had talked earlier about stigma, and that I know when a generation ago, there was such a stigma about receiving any kind of mental health support or just family therapy or any of those things. But that's another resource parents can use, isn't it? Is just to reach out to others to help. And
I think so. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of parents who have friends or colleagues that they hold up as such high esteem as amazing parents, and will say, God, I wish I could be like them. And I say to those parents, don't wish that. Create your own template for parenting. You don't have to follow somebody else's. Everybody, a perfect example, Ann, is all the research about parents or families who have dinner together. At the kitchen table, they're going to be the happiest families. And I say to parents, forget that. Having dinner together these days with all the kids' activities and things going on has become so difficult. So don't have that be the standard. Have just a time. It can be at 8 o'clock at night. Whether you have dinner together or not isn't relevant. But even if it's 15, 20 minutes where you can find the time to talk with your kids, that's good.
Yeah.
That's great.
But don't you think too that that parents as well as kids are so connected now to technology, to their phones, to the internet, and there's less time for communication now, isn't there? I mean, parents are guilty of it as well. I see it all the time. Families out at restaurants, and they're all on the phones, and no one's talking to each other. And
well, I had a woman in a class I taught in say to me, she would sit in the living room with her son, who had his friends over, high school kids, and they would be texting each other in front of her. And she got very angry because she perceived that as, you guys must be hiding something and not wanting me to know what you're talking about if you're texting. And but she didn't say that to her son. She just walked around angry about it. And because those opportunities for communication are few and far between, as you're mentioning, that's where modeling comes in. And that's where, as a parent, you have to set the example and tone. Because if you're just going to take away your kid's phone, and just to digress for a quick moment, because I can't think of a better analogy than I'm about to make. When I hear parents talk about how schools are giving too much homework these days, I get so angry. Because my question isn't whether they are or aren't giving homework. My question is, what's going to replace it? Because if less homework creates more opportunities for devices and games, that's not the answer.
That's right.
You know? And so, same thing with phones. If you are a parent and you are taking your kid's phone away because you think they're spending too much time on the phone, what is the message? Is the message that you have the power to take something away? Or is the message, I'm taking your phone away because I miss you and I love you and I want to sit in the room and spend time with you? But if you're not sharing that and you're not saying that and you're just doing it to do it because you're frustrated, I'm going to shut down if I'm a child. So those are things, Anne, we can't be so black and white. We have to just figure out what are the alternatives and not just punish and make rules. Let's explain and understand.
Yeah, I think there is that whole thing where we talk about the fundamentals of well-being and if kids know the reason for something, and we're respectful enough to say, this is why I'm having you do it, that's very important. But the other thing is autonomy for kids. I just was going to throw this out to you, just your thoughts on it, is that so much of what we're doing now is parents kind of trying to create like not a status symbol, but this is where I want you to go to school, this is what you're going to do, these are the things you're going to do, and kids having less and less choice over the things that have control over their own lives. And then the result is they dig their heels in because they want to have some control. So it's really finding the balance of the decisions we let them make, control. Do you want to play hockey this year? Or, so many kids stay in sports long after they've lost the desire because the parents, they don't want to disappoint their parents. They're not living for themselves. They're living for their parents' dreams for them. It's finding that balance, isn't it?
It is. And if I had one regret for my oldest son, it was that I spent his entire high school trying to save him and protect him from making mistakes that I know if you go down this path. And I think to your point, it's a fine line. There is the balance, but there is an autonomy that is necessary to let kids experience learning.
Right.
And I'll tell you, Anne, I think there is so much blame unfairly put on schools. And I'll tell you what I mean specifically. Think about when kids go to college. How do parents typically measure their investment for college? Their grades.
Right.
So parents are basically sending the message to kids that while you're at college, you better be getting good grades and you better get a good job when you graduate with college, because if not, my investment went for naught. Or my message to my kids in college is, do I want them to get good grades? Of course. But my message is, I want you to learn how to have experience life. I want you to join organizations. I want you to have great internships. I want you to participate in clubs, because you know what? That's your chance. That when you're in college, that's your last chance to not have the pressures of the world on you. And when we tell kids we're measuring them on their grades, well, what are they supposed to think? I mean, that's where a lot of the anxiety and stress and pressure. And I would ask a lot of parents, would you rather have your kids get an A and not have the opportunity to live and experience other opportunities, or get a B or even a C, God forbid, and have that experience? And yes, there's plenty of kids who manage to do both, and more power to them.
Right.
But I just think we as parents, schools have a part in it too, but we as parents have to say, we need to tell kids how they're being measured, not in a direct way, but we need to send the message to kids, we want you to be healthy emotionally, we want you to be healthy mentally, we want you to be able to build and grow and strengthen relationships. Because I don't know about you, Ann. To me, if you don't know how to build relationships, personal and professional relationships, you're not going to be happy.
But that's it, and isn't it interesting that people don't lose jobs out in the world and fail at their life's work because they aren't smart enough. They fail because they don't know how to connect with other people, and it's about the relationships and handling their emotions and all the things that are
So
beyond
when
that.
you had mentioned regulating emotions before, and I think that's such a huge part in it.
The other thing I was just going to ask you quickly, because before we end this, is just your thoughts on this as well, because we talk about resilience, and one of the things that I see more and more often is that we're not letting our kids experience some of the unpleasant things in life that they have to work through on their own. We want to fix things right away for them, and rather than, we hate to see them sad or unhappy, or we want to, if they break something, we want to immediately replace it and give them something. It's that whole idea, but they never actually learn to use coping skills because we never give them the opportunity. We're always in rescuing and helicoptering, but there is something to be said for, if they forget their homework, we don't rush to school to, that we have to let them. But it's heartbreaking when we see our kids sad. So again, it's finding the balance, isn't it?
It is, and I have a good thought to wrap that
Yes.
part up. So I've been a youth sports coach for 15 years or so, and I coach basketball and baseball and football and such. And whenever I have a new team, I always say the same thing when we first start the season. And you'll know where I'm going with this. I say, you know what? There's all this discussion now in youth sports where we're not going to keep score anymore, and it's all about having fun and whatever. And this is what I say to the team. I say this team is going to be about having fun and winning at the same time.
Yes.
You don't have to do one versus the other. And so I think with the coping skills and kids learning how to adjust, it's okay to teach kids to shoot for the stars.
Absolutely.
And to achieve and succeed. And it's also okay, and I'm big on the growth mindset, which is why I call my company Mindset Go. It's also okay to have them fail and embrace failure as a learning process, to take those mistakes and use them as drivers to be better. So it's everything has to be one or the other, Ann, and it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. Because I do think when we eliminate competition, then we eliminate all those opportunities to sometimes fail, to go for something with your whole heart and soul and not to win, but then to deal with that disappointment and say, okay, how does one pick oneself up? But if there's never any competition and they don't have to face that, when they finally ultimately do, they're not prepared to deal with it, so.
And whether you're an adult or a child, would you agree that the worst thing that can happen emotionally is indifference?
Right.
So if you're a child and you lose at something, or you don't win the spelling bee, or you lose a sporting event, or you didn't get an A on your report, if you're angry, if you're sad, if you're disappointed, good for you, because that means you can express your emotions.
That's right. That's a good way of
That's
framing
what it is.
Yes. That's very good. Will you just tell me a little bit about, you have a company, you have a
So I'll give you a very brief.
Yeah.
So Mindset Go is an organization that we work with actual professionals and companies. We work with parents and we work with kids. And the motto is, whatever your age, whatever your interest, we're teaching you how to be an effective and confident communicator. And we have two really neat programs we've developed for kids. And like I said, I do this free parenting workshop, this programs where I teach parents. And Ann, I tell you, it took me 43 years to figure out what I love to do in this world. And I wake up every day. And when you asked me to come on this show, I love this stuff. I'm excited.
I know you do.
I'm grateful.
Yeah.
I'm appreciative. And I just love coaching and helping and training people.
Good. So we'll make sure we put your contact information up just in case. So I wanted to, first of all, thank you for coming here today and sharing your wisdom and advice.
My pleasure.
And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This is It Takes a Village, Raising Resilient Kids in Today's World. I'm Dr. Ann Bergen.
Great.
Done? Dunzo. Good work, buddy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
What age range basketball do you coach?
Middle school.
Did you hear about the division?
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.